Hi folks! I thought I'd follow up with the last video showing you how I painted the area train and a lot of the other trains shown in the Kickstarter with the video showing you how I do the water effects. Now there's lots of different products that you can use for water effects, and there are lots of different techniques. Some of them rely on using opaque water effects where you don't have to do any painting of the surface underneath it. I tend to like the look more of transparent water effects where they're tinted, but that you can still see through underneath and create some illusion of depth with the painting that you do underneath the water itself. So I'll be showing you how I did that. This is the small pond, and as you can see, it comes with the edges textured with dirt and stone that can be painted as normal, but then it also comes with this smooth reservoir area that's designed to be able to be filled with water effects. You'll want to prepare and paint the water features the same as you do the other train pieces. Here's an example of the same small pond that's been gone through with the browns and then had the stone touched out. But as you can see, I didn't take very much care here in the middle to make sure that that center area is painted very well. The goal of painting this is because I'll be using water effects with a transparent dye in them, is you'll be able to see what's underneath it in this area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and paint this in a color similar to the colors that I'm going to use in the water effects. But when I paint them, closer to the edges here, I'm going to try to make the paint lighter, and I'm going to try to make the shade darker here in the middle. That way it'll give it an illusion of the water being shallower here on the outside and then deeper here in the middle. For colors, I'm going to be using the ceramic coat black that I used to paint some of this earlier. And then here I've just got a Citadel Loren Forest. This is just a green color that I had handy. There's really no reason you have to use paint as expensive as this to be able to do this. I just don't happen to have a cheaper craft acrylic green on hand. When I paint this, I'm going to start by taking the green color and I'm going to go around and paint it close to the edge. I don't have to paint the entire thing this light color because only the part here around the edge will actually be seen. As you'll see in a little bit, I'm going to go through and do black in the middle. I'm putting this paint on rather thickly, and I'm going to want to work fast because I'm going to want to keep this paint wet while I'm working with the paint in the middle so I can help blend it well. So all I'm doing is using this flat, it's about a 1/4 inch chisel brush, and going around the edges and making sure that I have a fairly even coat around the edges of the reservoir. Okay, now that I've got that, I can go through and add some black to the paintbrush, and then I want to go through and start adding that to the middle. Now here, at this point in time, I'm just trying to put it on rather thickly and get get everything covered with paint. Okay, so at this point, I've got black in the middle, it's still wet. I've got green around the outside, it's still wet. And then I can start kind of stippling with the brush and getting that paint to create a blended edge. When this has the water effects over it, it'll blend it in even more. But for now, this is the easiest way to get a transition. Now I could have used a brown in the middle, if I were doing things with blue water. Here I'm doing like the kind of brackish swamp water sort of thing. Then if I were doing things with blue, then I could use a darker blue in the middle and then a lighter blue on the outside. Or I've seen some people even use like a sandy tan around the outside in order to get that kind of look of having a beach or having sand underneath it. I'm going to wipe off some paint from my paintbrush. It's a general rule in painting that the paint usually goes from the wettest place to the driest place. So when the paintbrush is soaked with paint and the surface isn't, then the paint will go from the paintbrush to the surface. But when you've got a wet surface with a lot of wet paint and a dry brush, then you'll end up picking up paint instead. I'm going to go through, kind of dab this some more. And part of what's happened is the interior here has gotten lightened from the black because I mixed some green in with it. And that's okay. I can actually go back, and once this is dried, I can go and kind of dab another layer of black there in the middle. But I'm paying attention to the shoreline, making sure that I kind of put the paint where I want it to be. Alright, that's pretty good. So at this point, it's a lot of wet paint, but hopefully you can see that there is an even shoreline. I don't even want it to be too even. But it's lighter towards the shoreline and darker towards the middle. Once this dries, we'll go back and do another layer of black in the middle and darken it up even more in the middle, though at this point it could even be ready to go now once it dries. Okay, so there are lots of water effects out there. There are some that you need to, you kind of have granules that you melt down and pour in, and then there's several of them that are like this, that are two-part epoxy finishes. This is a product called Envirotex Lite, and it is available at lots of craft stores. Michael's has it, and it's one where you can get it in different sizes. Here I've got a pretty large 32-ounce kit of it, but you can get it in smaller kits as well. 32 ounces is enough to last me plenty long. Oftentimes at the larger craft stores, they'll have it, while it won't go on sale, you'll often be able to find 40% to 50% off coupons. So it comes in two separate tubes, or two separate containers. There's a part A, the resin, and a part B, the hardener, and to use it, you just mix them together in equal amounts of volume. Okay, so next I'm going to pour out about an ounce of each of the sides of the Envirotex Lite. Here I'm just using little 3-ounce mixing cups. You can get a feel for how much water effects it'll take for the different parts, but if you want to know the exact amount, you can go through and actually fill it up with water before you measure things out and look to see how much water fills in the reservoirs. But for my purposes, I usually just eyeball it. And here I've got about an ounce of each side for the small pond. Now we can mix in any variety of colors, and we need to mix in the colors before we do anything else. Before you actually mix the two parts together. So because I'm going for this kind of brackish swamp looking thing, I'm going to be using brown ink. This is from Vallejo, from their Game Colors range. And then here I've got some Citadel Wash, some Thraka Green. Some people have other recipes that they use for things. If I wanted a bluish color, I might use some blue and a little bit of green to add it some depth. Usually using just one color doesn't give you as realistic of a look as if you mix colors together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and put in a couple 5 drops of brown ink. And then I don't have an eyedropper for this, for the green ink, so I'm going to use a straw and kind of capture some and drop some in that way. Probably better if I could use an eyedropper for that. And again, I'm not really paying that much attention to how much I put in here. It's a swamp, so I reckon it'll look swampy. I'm going to go ahead and mix in this ink with a popsicle stick, and here I can see that that's pretty brownish. So maybe I went a little overkill with the brown. I'm going to put in some more green to try to balance it out. But the more ink I put in it, the more opaque it'll become. So it will get more transparent when I mix in the other half. It will dilute things. There are opaque inks that they make out there that work really well for this kind of thing. The folks at 3T Studios have some really neat train they've done where they used an opaque red dye in order to be able to create these really kind of creepy looking pools of blood. I got some plastic dinosaur bones that I've been looking forward to, if I can ever get a hold of the kind of dye that they're using, make a kind of a giant skeletal monster lying in a pool of blood. Okay, so this is good enough for me for now. So I've mixed together the ink pretty thoroughly, and then I'm going to mix the two halves in together. Now, since I'm not being careful about making sure that I am, some people suggest that you pour both cups into a third cup in order to make sure that you don't get any resin or any epoxy resin on the sides that doesn't get mixed together. But for my purposes, I'm just going to be really careful to scrape the sides and make sure that I mix it nice and thoroughly. So I'll mix this for probably about a good 30 seconds or so. It's got a really long working time, the Envirotex Lite does, so I don't really have to worry about it setting on me before I'm ready. This is Envirotex Lite is generally, or their advertised use at least, is for making bar tops, for getting some like nice sanded wood and then pouring a layer of this on top of it to make a really hard protective surface. So this stuff is pretty solid when it's done. It does take a while to harden, and it's something that you want to keep out of the way of dust or anything like that for a long time because it can attract that stuff like mad. But once it's dry all the way, once it's hardened, it's pretty much indestructible. All right, so that's good with that. Okay, so I decided not to go back and paint any more black in the middle. I decided that this was pretty much the shade that I wanted to begin with. So I've got my epoxy mixed up, and I've got my painted terrain piece. So when I pour this in, I want to make sure that this is on a level space, and that it's on a level space that it can kind of stay for a while. I don't want to have to worry about moving things around, and it'll be a good day or so before it's all the way dry. So I'm just going to pour this out slowly, and I'm going to go ahead and it's kind of thick and viscous, you can see. So I want to spread it out and give it a chance to settle down to make sure I'm not overfilling it. You can also see there's lots of bubbles suspended in it. We'll talk about how to deal with those in a moment, but that's kind of a part of the mixing process. Okay, you can see up here in some of the areas where the surface tension of the water effects are kind of holding it back a little bit. What some people do is they go through with a toothpick and kind of draw that up so that it makes a more naturally looking kind of water's edge there. We've also got a lot of bubbles in there from the mixing. And that is generally unavoidable, and it's also something that if we leave uncorrected, that it'll make a pretty awful looking water effects. It won't have that nice kind of glossy surface. Rather, there'll be lots of bumps and bubbles in it. So what the folks with Envirotex Lite recommend doing is either taking a propane torch or breathing over it, so either fire or breath to get rid of the bubbles. Instead of using a propane torch, I've found that using one of these grill lighters tends to work pretty well as a way of getting the same job done without having to have a torch set up. So the water effects have been sitting for a little bit, and as you can see, a lot more of the bubbles have started coming out. This is the time where I want to take a flame and lightly brush it over the top of the surface. Now I'm making sure not to touch anything, but as you can see, the bubbles just disappear and leave you with a nice, clear, glossy coat. This is one of those things where you can't do it with a hairdryer. I know, I've tried, and apparently it's not about the heat. Instead, it's supposedly about the carbon dioxide. If you don't have a torch or a lighter or something like that to be able to do this with, then apparently it works pretty well if you just breathe over it as well. I haven't had much success with that, so I tend to use fire. And And that's it. So what I'll do is I'll take a look at this a little bit later on and make sure no other bubbles have come up to the surface. And if they are, then a little light brush with fire will take care of them. But once this sets, and it might be probably about 4 hours or so until it sets, and then it won't reach maximum hardness until later, until I won't touch it again for at least a couple of days. But then it'll be ready to go through and block the edges. If I want to, I can add one thing that I add in some of the other examples that I've shown. For example, in this swamp, I've used bristles from a chip brush to use those as kind of long grasses by the side of it. But those are all added afterwards, after everything dries. You can see there too that they're around the edges, and it's hard to see with the way the light reflects off it as well, but it looks like it's shallower there along the edges and that gets dark in the middle. Again, that's how you use Envirotex Lite for water effects. It's a pretty simple process and it comes out with pretty spectacular results. Thanks again for supporting the Kickstarter, and if you have any questions at all, please let me know.